It's a little too hot to go outside and do any filming right now in North Carolina, so I'm going to stay inside and show you how to use your NX radio. Hey there, I'm John, this is Two Brothers RC, and this is your guide to get the most out of your NX radio. You guys know me more for flying with an IX radio, but I got my start with the DX series, which is largely identical to the NX series interface. Horizon sent over an NX radio earlier this year. I know my way around the system, and today I'm going to teach you how to work with it so that you can use your radio to get the most out of your aircraft. You don't need an IX radio to do everything that I do. So let's start with the most basic overview to get newer pilots up to speed with how their radio operates. This video will be in chapters, so anyone who's bored with basic details can skip ahead. First, let's start by booting it up. Press and hold the Spektrum logo until you hear it make a sound. The NX radio will boot up quickly and you'll be at the airplane screen, which contains the following information. At the top and top right, you'll see the current throttle position, transmitter battery level, and the mode in which the transmitter is operating. You can ignore the DSMX info because there's really no reason to adjust it that I've ever seen. At the top left, you'll see the model's name if you've named it, otherwise it's going to be something like a number and the word acro if you didn't name it. On the outermost extents of the screen at the left, right, and bottom left and bottom right, you'll see the current trim position for your flight controls and throttle stick. If you're completely new to flying, trim is adjusted by using the corresponding trim switches to correct aircraft movement in the air. For example, if your plane is pitching down on its own, meaning that it's flying towards the ground with no input on your part, you can press down on the right trim switch to make the elevator control surface trimmed for level flight. You may have to do this repeatedly until the plane flies level on its own. There are two ways to operate trim in the NX radio. I suggest using crossed trims, which cause trim inputs to be backward, which means that the left trim will control the right stick, and vice versa. This means that the throttle trim controls elevator trim, aileron trim controls rudder trim, and so forth. It swaps their positions so that you don't have to take your hand off of a specific stick in order to trim the control surface it's assigned to. You can adjust trims to be crossed by pressing the click wheel, scrolling down to and selecting System Setup, then select Trim Setup. Scroll down to Trims Normal and change it from normal to crossed by pressing the click wheel. You can also change what trim switches are used by scrolling over to the next icon, clicking it, and changing the trim switch to your preferred switch. I suggest sticking with crossed or normal because they're the easiest to remember. The next step to cover is basic setup that applies to all of your models, because you're probably like me and you own more than one plane, or you'd like to eventually. Every time you buy a new airplane, you normally have to set it up completely manual and change everything if you're a typical RC pilot. Try thinking like me and set it up outside the box. I set up my aircraft based on templates, meaning, for example, I use the E-flite Turbo Timber Evolution as my template for anything that I want to fly that's got a similar wing. Meaning that what I want to fly has two aileron servos that I'm wiring to the receiver to enable full span flaps, or crow. Flaps, a rudder, and elevator. In every one of my template models, I program my voltage telemetry callouts to go off every 30 seconds, so I can keep an eye on the voltage of the batteries that I'm flying to replace the timer with something that I actually find useful. Let's go through setting up a template together to make your airplanes fly the way mine do. First up, we need to enable max throws. If you haven't unlocked your receiver yet, and it's a bind and fly airplane, you need to unlock the receiver, otherwise you'll be limited to 100 travel up and down on all surfaces that the gyro controls, which means your aileron, rudder, and elevator. Click the card in the top right to visit the AS3X Plus guide that we filmed last year, which goes over this process, or hop on Discord via discord.gg/2brosrc for help. From the main menu, click the scroll wheel. Scroll down to Servo Setup. Scroll down past Travel and select Aileron. Click. Scroll all the way to the right until you hit 150 travel. At the bottom, watch the channel monitor as I move the stick. You'll notice that it hits 150 up and down. That's what we need. Now do the same for elevator and rudder. This is how you get maximum travel for your planes, and is key to getting the most out of them. However, you need to ensure that your control push rods aren't binding on any of the surfaces, so don't move to 150 travel unless you've checked each axis to make sure that you're not going to bind the servo. Next up, we'll enter the Rates and Expo menu. I always fly my airplanes at 100% rate. Rate is a function of travel. They are independent of one another, which means that 100% of 150 travel is 150. So, to get multiple rates, high, normal, and low, you'll have to set this menu up to do it per axis. Let's start with ailerons. Scroll down the switch and select On, then click it. Throw the switch that you want to use to control your rates. I prefer switch B personally, so that's what I'm using here. Scroll back up to Expo, and I suggest using 50% as a starting point. Now throw the switch to the mid position and change the rate from 100% to 67%. Why 67? Because 67% of 150 is 100. I suggest setting the Expo to half for normal rates and use 25%. Now throw the switch to the lowest position and change the rate to 47%, because 47% of 150 is 70, which is normal for most pilots when choosing low rates. Set the Expo to 10%. Now repeat this on all surfaces, from elevator to rudder as well. If you're like me, you may never change out of high rates, because that's what I do all my flying on. But some people aren't comfortable with that, and this is how you set the limitation on the stick travel without changing the travel itself. You may also be wondering what Expo is. Put simply, it dampens the control response on a given axis around the midpoint of the stick based on how much positive Expo you add. Negative Expo increases stick sensitivity in the mid-range. Expo doesn't affect rates or travel at all. It just smooths out how it feels or makes it feel more sensitive to your input. Here's a great example in real flight. I purposely set up the aileron throws to be ridiculous on this 3D plane to highlight how Expo works. This is what 0% Expo looks like. It produces a 1-to-1 response, but servo travel doesn't always mean that you get a real 1-to-1 feel on the stick. That's what Expo is for. Just like I said a few moments ago, I suggest flying with 50% Expo as a starting point if you're using 150 travel like I prefer to. Here's what 50% Expo looks like in comparison, and you can see how it dampens the control input around the center of the stick, making it feel much more natural to control and allows for high control throws without feeling like it's too difficult to fly. Next, for your template, you need to set up a throttle cut. Back out of Rates and Expo and select Throttle Cut. I use switch H for this, but any switch you're comfortable with will work. Click Inhibit, then throw your preferred switch. Click the wheel again. Scroll up to -100, select it, and set it to -150. This ensures that your throttle will be cut no matter what your throttle setting is. Scroll down to Require Stick Low, click Set Yes. This makes it so that you can never throttle up without having first reduced throttle to low. That way, you won't be one of the lucky few who have had a propeller send them to the emergency room. Now it's time to name the model. Click the click wheel, scroll down to System Setup, select Yes to disable the radio frequency system, scroll down to Model Name, and begin the arduous process of trying to use an on-screen keyboard with the click wheel. I don't think you really need for me to explain how this is done. I'm just taking the opportunity this video affords to say that I really hate doing this, and I hope that you enjoy downloading my pre-made setups using my iX radio, which actually has a keyboard that I can type with to save you the effort of doing this. Next, we need to get your telemetry system going so you have access to your flight pack voltage in the air. You don't need to do any physical setup if you're using a bind and fly airplane from Horizon Hobby in the last few years. Anything that's shipped with an Avian ESC has integrated voltage telemetry and is simple to set up. But if you're flying a plug-and-play airplane with a stock ESC, you will need to use a voltage cable, seen on screen, to get telemetry. Contrary to popular opinion, you do not need to solder this cable in place. Here's how I do every one of my airplanes. First, I take the red ESC lead and I drill a hole into it using a very sharp hobby knife. Simply pressing the tip into the lead and spinning it will do the trick. Once you've got a big enough hole, take the voltage cable, hold the tinned tip by a pair of small pliers, and shove the tinned tip into the hole that you just made. Get it way up in there. Then wrap it tightly with electrical tape. The whole process takes about a minute and doesn't involve any soldering. Plug in the lead into the receiver's volt port. It'll only go in one way, and you're good to go. If you're wondering why mine doesn't have a black lead, it's because I removed it. You can safely snip off the black wire as it is wholly unnecessary in general. Now, let's get into the telemetry menu and do the setup work in the transmitter so you can get voice callouts telling you what your voltage is. First, click the click wheel and scroll down to telemetry. You can auto-config if this menu is blank, or you can simply add volts if volts doesn't exist as a telemetry menu item. Either way, you need a volts option to get the callouts that we're looking for. Enter volts, determine how many cells you're flying with, add that number to the LiPo section at the bottom. If you're flying on a 6-cell aircraft, multiply 3.5 volts by 6, which gives you 21 volts. Set volts min to 21 volts if you're on a 6-cell aircraft. If you're on a 4-cell aircraft, change this to 14 volts. Do the math for anything smaller or larger than this. 3.5 multiplied by how many cells you're flying. Since I've loaded a 4-cell pack into this ESC, I'll set volts min to 14. Click again to set the number, and select Inhibit under Alarm, and set it to your preferred alarm style. I use a tone on my NX radio, but you can have it vibrate too. This will trigger an audible warning and let you know when it's getting on time to land. Higher quality batteries have less voltage sag and will let you fly longer without hearing the warning go off. You can set max voltage too, just in case you plug in the wrong battery type, though you'll usually cause the smoke system to go off in the plane if it's incorrect. So just make sure that you're running the right battery for the right plane before plugging anything in to be safe. Next, scroll down to status reports. There's two ways to add voltage status.
Flight pack 15.4 volts.
You can have it automatically call out based on the duration of time you select here, or you can add the info to a switch. I would suggest having it automatically tell you every 30 seconds in this menu. I also suggest that you scroll down to warning reports and have it go off every 5 seconds. There you have it.
Flight pack 15.4 volts.
That's how you get voltage telemetry and can tell what your battery info is in real time. This will help you avoid destroying your packs too. Timers basically become obsolete after this, so what I'll suggest doing next is going into your timer menu and changing it to a stopwatch, so the transmitter will record the exact amount of powered flight, which is way more useful than a simple countdown timer that doesn't take into account strong winds, more throttle usage, and so forth. Let's cover how to change the timer to a stopwatch. First, go back a level into the settings menu and scroll down to timer. In this menu, scroll down to mode and click on countdown. Scroll down and select stopwatch. Scroll down, select over 25%, click, change it to 10%. That's usually the point at which most ESCs begin to provide power to the motor. Scroll down, select next. click it to move to the next screen, and do that one more time to get to the next screen. Here, you can determine whether you want the stopwatch to notify you of the passage of time. I prefer hearing a timer beep the first 20 and 30 seconds with a beep every minute so I can have a quick idea of how long I've been flying. Change this to your own preferences, then scroll down to Next. This is where we get rid of the most annoying parts of having a timer, the announcement that the timer has started or stopped, whether it be a voice or a beep. I suggest disabling the timer start and timer stop sounds unless you really like them for some reason. I definitely don't, and I turn that off on all of my aircraft because I have this disabled in every model template that I copy over. Next, here's how you set up your audio events so you know what switch does what while you're flying. Let's start with a switch to give you on-demand voltage info, and add callouts for specific switches that govern specific uses. From the main menu, click the click wheel and scroll down to Audio Events. Select Switch Changes. Scroll down to Add New Sound Event. In this menu, scroll down to Inhibit, select it, and throw the switch that you want to use. I'm going to use switch E here. The numbers below the switch name determine which position of the switch will be used to call out a specific piece of information. I'll scroll down to position 2, which is the lowest physical position on the switch. Click on Select Category, scroll up to Telemetry, then scroll up to Volts and select it. If you throw the switch, you should hear the current flight pack voltage.
Flight pack 15.4 volts.
Back up and select position 1. If you're at the bottom of the list and don't want to scroll to the top, press Clear to go to the top of this menu instantly. And choose F-log, which is short for flight log. Place this on the middle position. This contains your aircraft's current link information, so you can tell if you've got too many frame losses. A bad number of frame losses in a 5-minute flight would be about 500 or more. It's useful information to know, and can help you figure out if your antennae need to be repositioned. Back out of this menu, and leave the top switch position as silence so that you can disable the voltage callouts if you don't want to hear them constantly playing back. There's a bunch of different audio callouts you can use here, and you can see me picking my usual setup for switches while I narrate. The only problem with this audio system is that it's difficult to find some options because they're not categorized, like AS3X mode and safe mode, which are located in the list called All Sounds, and you've got to do quite a bit of click wheel scrolling to find them since they're at the very bottom of this list. I suggest you set your rate switch to match your high, medium, and low rates, along with announcing your throttle cut, AS3X and safe modes if you use them, and your flap positions too. This is all super useful info to hear while you're flying. As pilots, having audio callouts is huge, because you can focus on flying rather than looking down at the transmitter to know what you're adjusting in the air. And that's the basic setup that I use for all of my aircraft. Of course, you'll need to change the aircraft type for different airplanes, so let's cover that next. From the main menu, enter System Setup, disable radio frequency, then select aircraft type. The main wing types are normal, dual aileron, flaperon, one aileron, one flap, one aileron, two flaps, two ailerons, one flap, two ailerons, two flaps, elevon, elevon B, 4 ailerons, and 6 ailerons. The main tail types are normal, V-tail A, V-tail B, dual elevator, dual rudder and dual elevator, taileron, taileron B, taileron plus 2 rudders, and taileron B plus 2 rudders. While I could break down information on all of these, I'm going to stick with the most commonly used wing and tail types and when you should consider using which wing with which tail, which segues into my next point. Each aircraft type tells the Spektrum AS3X system how to stabilize the aircraft. So, if you're one of those people who unlocked their radio but couldn't figure out why only one aileron is stabilized in AS3X Plus or Safe, this is why. You need to unlock a bind and fly aircraft and reprogram the receiver for it to understand the new wing type that you're working with, otherwise it has no idea. This is also covered in the AS3X Plus guide linked below. Let's start by talking types. Starting off, normal wing and normal tail. One channel controls both ailerons, one channel controls the elevator, and one channel controls the rudder. Dual aileron. This means two channels are used to control both ailerons. One channel controls the left, one channel controls the right, and you'll need to run each servo to an open channel on the receiver. This is most useful in two situations: with a 3D plane like the Extra 300 or similar, which allows you to mix both ailerons to point up to work as air brakes on landing and to help reduce wing area to fall faster in specific maneuvers, and to get differential ailerons set up for planes like the Super Decathlon, which need differential to avoid the nose being pulled in the opposite direction to the roll input. Differential unlocks as a menu option in the function list, which is accessed with a single click wheel click from the main screen. With this configuration and the upcoming flaperon configuration, playing with differential causes one aileron to move less than the other. Generally speaking, to remove adverse yaw, which is the nose pulling in the opposite direction to your roll, you'd want the aileron moving up to move much more than the aileron moving down. Play with it and see for yourself how it reacts. Flaperon. Similar to dual aileron, but the ailerons can be used as flaps or spoilers without needing to custom mix them to do so. You can use the flap system to change how they operate, whether they move up or down, from the flap system menu in the function list accessed by a single click from the main screen. Aircraft that most commonly use the flaperon wing type would be the F-16, Su-27, and similar. One aileron and one flap. This configuration assumes that you have both aileron servos tied into one another via a Y cable, and both flap servos connected to each other with another Y cable. The flap system is accessible in this configuration, but the differential menu is not. Common aircraft that you can experience with a flap setup like this would be the E-flite Turbo Timber in stock form. One aileron and two flaps. This configuration assumes that you've got two ailerons tied together via a Y cable and that you're running both flap servos directly to the receiver in two different channels. This configuration is most useful in aircraft like the Night Timber X or other similar aircraft where you can mix the aileron system to the left flap channel, which causes both flaps to move differentially instead of in sync with one another to operate as full-span ailerons. To add roll to the flaps, you mix the aileron system to the left flap channel. This channel operates both flap servos differentially. Change the mix to 100% up or 100% down, depending on which direction causes them to move in sync with the ailerons like you see on screen currently. Two aileron and one flap. This configuration assumes that you have an aircraft like the F-22 80mm, where you don't want to split the flaps off as flaperons, but you do want to enable reflexed ailerons, also known as crow, to utilize them as speed brakes and to help with holding a stable, higher angle of attack. Similar to one aileron and two flaps, mixing a channel like the flap system to the right aileron channel will cause both ailerons to reflex up or down depending on what rate you use. Two ailerons and two flaps. This configuration assumes that you want full control over the wing, which is what you can see on display here with the Freewing F-22 90mm. I have the flaps and ailerons mixed to work as spoilers on landing with a switch. This is done by using the same mix logic that I mentioned earlier. Elevon and Elevon B are used to control delta wing aircraft. These types of aircraft are found commonly in model jets like the Freewing Eurofighter, Freewing Gripen, and so forth. The primary control surface of a delta wing are elevons. They combine the functionality of an elevator and an aileron, and they're found only on pure delta wings. If your servos don't operate correctly in elevon mode, as in pulling the stick doesn't cause both elevons to go up, while rolling left doesn't cause the left elevon to go up, and vice versa, then you should try reversing the servos in servo setup. If that still doesn't produce the right response, undo the servo reverse you just did, and change the wing type to Elevon B. The Elevon wing type also opens up the canard tail type, which is actually odd because canards go on the nose, but I suggest not using the canard tail type at all, and instead program them manually by mixing each channel to work in opposition to the elevons. As in, when your elevons pitch up, the leading edge of your canards should point up too, not the trailing edge, and vice versa for pitching down. You can program this into the auxiliary gyro system by following the AS3X Plus guide or asking for help on Discord via discord.gg/2brosrc. Now let's focus on tail types. First up is dual elevator. This is used when you have two elevator servos and you want to control them independently of one another, say to add roll into the elevator surface. This can be used to great effect on jets like the FMS Super Scorpion, which seriously lacks roll authority otherwise. To add roll to the elevators, you mix the aileron system to the left elevator channel. This channel operates both elevator servos differentially. Change the mix to 100% up or 100% down, depending on which direction causes them to move in sync with the ailerons like you see on screen currently. Dual rudder. This is used when you want to be able to split the rudders to use them as air brakes. For example, the F-22 90mm approaching the runway has visible rudder air brakes deployed on top of crow, making the ailerons pop up. This is a very effective configuration that requires flying with a little more thrust, which helps get through zones of turbulence and wind shear. To utilize this, you need to mix the flap system to the left rudder channel. Again, change the mix to 100% up or 100% down, depending on which direction causes them to move in sync and point outward. Or, in the case of the F-18 from Freewing, have them point inward during takeoff for scale fidelity, and because it adds more pitch control and makes the plane rotate faster, just like it does in full scale. Taileron and Taileron B are just like elevon and elevon B. If Taileron doesn't work, try Taileron B. If that doesn't make the surfaces move correctly, reverse the servos in either A or B mode. Taileron is mostly used to set the gyro up. A fighter jet with full flying stabilators like the F-14, F-22, F-16, F-18, and so forth benefits significantly from programming the gyro as a Taileron tail type so that the stabs will correct for deviation in both roll and pitch. Then, you can go back and set it up as a dual elevator tail type in the radio after programming the gyro so that you can turn off rolling on the stabs if you want the option to do so, or use a curved mix to control the stab movement. The dual elevator mix from earlier covers this. By this point, you might be confused as to why you don't need to set up multiple mixes to make two servos move in unison. That's because Spektrum uses a concept called back mixing, which allows you to mix input from one channel to two channels, so long as those channels are split from the aircraft type menu. If you're using a dual flap, dual aileron, dual rudder, or dual elevator setup, mixing to the left channel or the right channel for a specific control surface produces different results. Try it and see. It saves a lot of setup time once you understand what it's doing. As always, make sure that you cross-reference your current servo assignments by checking Channel Assign so you know what ports go to what servo. Do keep in mind that anytime you change the wing or tail type, you need to double check and ensure that you're still getting full 150 travel in servo settings. If you need to reverse a channel, you can do it from this screen as well. To get the most out of this video, you'll want to duplicate the model that you've created when you buy a new airplane. That way you don't have to set up these audio callouts again, nor will you have to change your rates, travel, or expo. Any mixes you create will be duplicated too. Copying your existing models is a huge time saver, and here's how you do it. From the main screen, press the click wheel, scroll down to System Setup. Choose Yes to disable the radio frequency, and scroll down to Model Utilities and select it. From this menu, scroll down to Copy Model, click on the model in the From category, and change it to the one that you want to duplicate. In this case, we'll duplicate the tutorial model. Click again and scroll down to the next line and make sure that it says Add New Model. Scroll down to Copy and click Copy once more to initiate the process. Now go back to the main screen. From here, you can quick swap to the new model by pressing the back and clear buttons simultaneously. This is the fastest way to switch models on the NX radio. Now you're finished with learning the basic functions of your NX radio. Next up is advanced mixing and forward programming to get throttle-based gains. This is what you see me flying almost every jet on Two Brothers RC with. This vastly improves how an aircraft responds in the air. At high thrust, you're flying very fast, so you don't need very much gain. At low thrust, or when you've configured the airplane for landing with flaps, the gains will kick up higher to stabilize the aircraft even in strong wind. Look at my J10 from Freewing and how it reacts to the throttle-based gain setup with gains at max during this landing, and you'll see what I'm talking about and why it's important. Without this gain setup, this jet would have crashed, guaranteed, instead of just getting a little scuffed up from the sudden wind gusts. To begin, there's a few prerequisites that we'll need. First, you need to go into Channel Assign and assign a switch to control your gains. I don't suggest using the knob. You'll need to take your hand off of a stick to do that. One of the 3 position switches will work great for this use, and I'll show you how to do it. First, go to Channel Assign, which is reached from the function list, System Setup, Channel Assign. Scroll down to your preferred open channel. I'm going to use Channel 9 or Auxiliary 4 here, but any other open channel will work. Click and select the input, then throw the switch to assign the switch to control that channel. I know it's Auxiliary 4 because moving to the next page, Receiver Port Assignment, shows that the 9th channel is controlling Auxiliary 4 input. We'll use this for mixing next. Second, make sure that you've set up the receiver in forward programming. If you don't know how to do this, follow the AS3X Plus guide linked below, which covers it. You will need to understand the basics of forward programming prior to attempting to move further in this section. In forward programming, make sure that you set the channel you're using to control AS3X Plus gains. Then move to the gyro settings, AS3X settings, fixed/adjustable gains menu, and ensure that all of the axes are set to adjustable. Then back up one level and enter Capture Gyro Gains. We're not going to capture the gains here and turn them into fixed gains. What we are going to do is demonstrate the master gain control that we've set up with the switch, because that's what this switch becomes, a master control that governs the total amount of gain being used in the air. With my switch at the top position, you can see that the gyro sees full gains, 35 roll, 60 pitch, and 25 yaw. That's what I've programmed so far. With the switch set to the midpoint, the gains are cut in half, 18 roll, 30 pitch, 13 yaw. With the switch set to the lowest point, all 3 axes become zeroed out. Why is that, you ask? Here's why. Back out of forward programming and go to the main screen. Then scroll over to the Channel Monitor menu, and you'll be able to see the results of what we just did. Throwing the switch in any direction will cause it to change the channel value. At the top position for Auxiliary 4, it should be 100. At the bottom, it should be -100, and in the middle, it should be 0. This is important, because those values are what are going to drive the mix that we're going to create. If it helps, think of -100 as being 0 on a scale of 0 to 100. Hence, why the gyro gains were zeroed out. 0, the middle position on the switch, is actually 50, which is why you saw half gains. 100, the top position, is 100, which is why you saw full gains. Why is this important? Because a value of 0 in a channel controlling the gains causes the gyro to disable completely, and a value of 100 causes them to be full, no matter what your stick input is in the mix that we're going to create. So, third, let's move to the mixing menu and begin by creating a new curved mix. I'd suggest naming it Throttle Gains. I know it takes a long time to do this, but just bear with me. Next, select the first inhibit and set it to throttle. Select the second inhibit and set it to Auxiliary 4. the same channel we're controlling with a switch. Leave position 1 at 0. This will mean that your base gain level is always half of what you put into forward programming. If you set 100 for all axes, you'll have 50 as your baseline. Select the second point and set it to -20. This will reduce those gains by 10%, so if you've set the gains to 100, they'll be 90 at the middle of the stick. Next, set the third point to -50. This will reduce the scheduled gain by 25%, so gains of 100 will be 75 at full throttle. If you're flying on an Elevon wing type, you can stop here and go test out your gains and see how they fly. Start low and work your way up until you're happy. When it's time to land, throw the gains to full with your switch by pushing it to the top. Enjoy your much easier to land airplane that's probably way more scale than it was before with a miniature flight computer inside of it. If you're flying something with flaps, I suggest governing this gain with your flap switch. Scroll down and select On, then throw your flap switch and put it at half flaps. Since it was programmed for On instead of a switch, you'll need to program the same values in again on 2 different positions of the switch. We'll speed through this section. Next, scroll down and select Expo. Then enable it so it says Active. Expo in this context is not like Expo on the stick axes. Expo means that you're converting the linear graph points to Bezier points, meaning that they become smooth and interpolated between the points, rather than being pointy and harsh like a jagged mountain peak. This helps smooth the transition between throttle points while you're flying. Next, push your throttle with Cut enabled to -50 on the graph. Scroll down and add a point. Throw the flap switch to the second flap position and add a point on that graph too. Scroll up to the new point, change its value to 50 or more. This will cause your gains to increase significantly on the approach with your flaps dropped and with landing thrust applied. Throw the flap switch to full flaps and do the same thing. Now you're good to go. Fly the plane and test it out. The same advice I gave for Elevon wing types applies here too. Start with lower gains, then work your way up. You can see the result of this mixing in the captured gyro gains screen. As I add flaps and increase throttle, you can see the gains significantly increase. This is the way that I fly almost every jet and even some props, and it makes for less stressful landings and allows you to focus more on flying rather than fighting the wind, or in my case, a severely tail-heavy center of gravity. That about covers it. This has been a long time coming, and I hope you guys found it useful. This took a ton of work over the course of a week to create for you, and I'd love it if you hopped over to twobrosrc.com/supporters and joined our membership program to help us demo airplanes for you that companies won't send out, like the newest Freewing, Flyfans, and X-Fly releases. Huge thanks as always goes out to our channel members on twobrosrc.com/supporters, and a very special thanks goes out to our mega fans, Sarasota RC Squadron, Michael Smith, JR Man, and Todd, along with our ultra fans, Seahawk92 and TBRC Fan. You guys kick so much ass, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial too. Coming up soon will be a full year's look at the E-flite Sportix. Quite possibly the most unintentional 3D plane ever made. See you guys next week.